They paid me $5,000 to go through hell. My eye was drawn to the commercial because of its simple, straightforward approach. Transform research. Get $5,000. Call right now. I wish I could claim I phoned them, not sure why. I wish I could say that I entered their waiting arms from some act of God or deceit. Still, that would be a falsehood. The reality is I phoned them in need of the money. I was having problems obtaining consistent employment since I had been laid off from the publishing company I worked for. I was facing my second eviction notice and months late on rent. I wanted not to be a failure. I phoned them out of self-serving motives. They are who? Not precisely sure, though. Looking back, their clear concealment of their identities ought to have alarmed me. But at the moment, their demand appeared too intriguing, their reward too great for me to risk losing the opportunity to assist them. My best estimate is that this are a group of private researchers sponsored by a super corporation. They are definitely required. Otherwise, they couldn't have paid for the machine and nothing else. On our first meeting, they showed me the machine. It was housed in the basement of a 5-story office building in a huge chamber. At the time, it was under work. They were still soldering cables and connecting pipes. Still in unfinished form, though, it looked really breathtaking. Have you ever come across a sensory deprivation chamber? I owned. Actually, I had been inside one once while I was in college. I was on a true hippie-dipped spiritual trip back then. You know, a lot of meditation, psychedelic drug experimentation, mostly mystical mushrooms. Along that path, I became inspired to spend an hour of my life, along with $60 in student loans, inside a sensory deprivation chamber at a nearby spa. Your classic sensory deprivation chamber is a big metal tank loaded with roughly 1 foot of salt water. You enter the water and float. Then someone, a spa worker in my case, shuts the tank to create total darkness. It should feel as though you no longer have your two main sensations since your vision is covered and your body is hanging in the water. Depending on who you ask, this is claimed to be calming, improve your creative process, let you attain higher consciousness, hallucinations, or perhaps acquire magic abilities. My college's chamber experience was really uneventful. I recall that the salt made my skin itch and the water was quite cold. Meditating or channeling my inner chakra or whatever the spa promised was challenging. Though I never got the chance, honestly, I did often wonder what it would have been like to enter one of those things while tripping on some magic mushrooms. The sensory deprivation chamber looked nothing like the one I used in college. This room appeared as a vivisected suit of medieval armor scattered over a big metal table. About 3 times my own body, the metal body was connected to thousands of tubes and wires. The chamber's head, sometimes known as helmet, was colossal and circular with a large brass pipe coming out of its crown onto the tiled floor underfoot. I could not name any of the 50 or 60 computer screens, 20 or so server boxes, or several variations of medical equipment on the walls encircling the chamber if I tried. Not to add the salaries of the dozens of lab coat-clad experts manning those computer displays. It dawns on me now that the utility bills and computers alone for the machine must have been many tens of times greater than the meager $5,000 they offered. Again, maybe this should have set up alarms, but I turned away with the deliberate ignorance of a guy about to become homeless. The man displaying the equipment told me his name was Dr. Monison. He was a balding elderly man with a neat shave and blue-focused clear eyes. He always wore blue scrubs and a neat white lab coat when I saw him. The main coordinator for my participation on this project was Dr. Monison. He addressed all of my inquiries, brought me the required waivers, and clarified the intent of the machine. Questions such, "So what precisely am I expected to do? We want you 3 days of sensory deprivation in our chamber." My facial expression definitely revealed my shock. 3 days? That means will kill me? After 3 days of pure isolation, you most certainly would still be alive, but you would probably become critically sick from extreme dehydration. Still, the machine will hydrate, feed, and otherwise keep you going through the trial. That means there is no chance of physical injury. Dr. Monison then proceeded to discuss machine operation. The inmate of your ordinary deprivation chamber loses their sense of sight, feeling, and, to a lesser degree, hearing. This deprivation, this act of closing the outside world out from the occupant's thinking, lessens the load on their brain. The occupant's mind is thus free to stray more freely, free to think more creatively, to enter a deeper state of consciousness, to meditate, and so on. Standard sensory deprivation chambers do have a flaw, though. The brain will remain burdened by internal stimuli, even if most outside inputs are released from it. The visual and auditory impulses will still cause problems. That means the brain is still quite conscious of its own carrier, the human body. The brain will still react to the hunger and thirst of the vessel carrying it. It will still handle the need to and the motion of urinating and defecating. These internal disruptions never stop, but the point is that ordinary sensory deprivation chambers cannot really be claimed to deny the occupant of their senses. Your usual sensory deprivation chamber is not this one. Even a casual look at the gadget made obvious what the doctor intended. Soft rubber lined inside the exoskeleton part of the machine will adjust to preserve the exact temperature of human skin. Many different body processes are under supervision and regulation by the tubes and wires. The body gets watered and fed automatically through these tubes. The unpleasant body functions are managed with a catheter and another set of tubes. A respirator controls salivation and automatically breathes. While in the machine, even the body's normal feeling of touch is totally eliminated. This IV cord feeds a numbing agent into the bloodstream that totally turns off all sensation. The most important tool in our sensory deprivation program is the numbing substance. The list stretched on and on. It became very evident that they had indeed covered everything, even for me. Among hundreds of applications to participate in the trial was myself. I was the first-round draft pick, marking a first in my life. I had been selected for 3 purposes, the scientists told me. First of all, their words, not mine. I had no past history of mental or physical sickness that would subject my experience in the chamber to intervening variables. Second, my weight and height fit the original shape of the machine really closely. Although the legs will have to be lengthened ever so slightly, you are by far the closest fit to our original design. Third, the most important, nothing outside of that chamber may cause the experiment to be early ended, not even a houseplant to look after. I had no work, no live family member, no significant other. Knowing that I would stay calmly inside their contraption for the whole experiment, they could breathe easily. Third on importance for the scientists was number. The contraption they had created especially let 3 full days of seclusion. Should the process of the machine had to be stopped early, it would take 1 month to reset the machine and resume the experiment. Sadly, reason number 3 also meant that nobody came looking for me. The entrance procedure was thorough and protracted. I signed what looked to be hundreds of liability releases. I listened to caution after warning on the possible adverse effects. You should be aware the isolation procedure may be stressful on you, even though your bill of health seems perfect. According to our preliminary studies, possible impacts are disassociation, auditory and visual hallucinations, depression, time dilation, anxiety, suicidal thoughts, and other neuroses. Still, we think these impacts are rare. They gave me many weeks to get ready for the trial. During that period, my only needs were not significantly altering my body weight or developing bipolar disorder. Eventually, I managed. Those few weeks I lived regularly, seeing movies, applying for employment, turned down for those positions, and reading a few books. Even with Dr. Monison's attempts to get me ready, I was anxious on the day. The process will be broken out in phases. You could first experience a moderate level of stress. Shortly after, we hope you will drift into a moderate level of exhilaration for the whole process. A small audio cue will signal you a few minutes before the trial ends. This will help you gradually come out of your condition of sensory deprivation and be able to reacclimate free from shock risk. He played for me a brief musical clip of bells ringing, the audio cue. Then, with little ceremony or thought, I was instructed to take off my clothes and ascend the machine. Laying down within the exoskeleton, I could feel the warm rubber against my naked flesh. The metal casing of the contraption restricted me on all sides, even while the chamber remained open. The expert started to fasten a medical device score on my body gradually. Every needle of an IV and every unpleasant tube insertion made me oddly calm. But I started to feel a terrible dread when a respirator was positioned on my face. One idea dominated my head as I felt my body being kept in place. Oh God, just what have I done? To lock off my ears, the researchers pressed the exoskeleton's helmet inward on either side of my skull. The globe went silent. My sides started to show a droplet of perspiration. Then I heard a voice, apparently emanating from inside my own skull. "Hello, Dr. Monison, here is you. I am talking to you from a small speaker built into the exoskeleton helmet. Your vital signs point to a start of panic. This is natural. As we finish getting ready, kindly try to relax. I swear the procedure will soon enough start to be fun. Just telling me to unwind somehow made me more nervous. I felt the machine close about my body before I could respond. The numbing substance piped into my body was already beginning to take over my extremities. When I tried to rebel against the machine, my arms would not move. When I tried to scream, the respirator kept my tongue securely in place. I couldn't move, not able to act, except pay attention. I could still see as scientists hurried about me checking vitals and getting the exoskeleton ready for shutting. I could still see as a massive analog timer showed up on a TV screen above me, starting to transmit a time, 1 minute till the start of deprivation. I repeated, trying to yell. I once again sought to ask to be released. I discovered I cannot feel no portion of my body. I tried to get someone's attention by straying my eyes, but nobody seemed to be looking at me. 30 seconds till deprivation starts. I would have started crying had my tear ducts been functioning. Without little else to do, I started to wish this was a bad dream. To pray I was not in this chamber, but rather home in bed. 5 seconds until deprivation starts. The last thing I saw was Dr. Monison's face slanted over me, waving in front of me, saying something I couldn't really grasp. Closing the face of the exoskeleton across mine. 0 seconds till the start of deprivation, and suddenly darkness descended. I would have started hyperventilating right away if I had been in charge of my own breathing. Never had I sensed such a deep gloom as in that instant. Not able to see even my own body, I felt as though I had been taken out of the picture. My eyes swam in every direction in pursuit of a single atom of light, but came nowhere. After considerable thought, I understood that I had lately been in the machine for some time. I had no idea just exactly how long. My only sense of time without outside cues of any kind was counting individual seconds in my thoughts. But time passed. I discovered that I was drifting in my ideas while simultaneously worried on my detention. I started to take stock of my life, my current unemployment, my small number of close buddies. I went through a wave of despair. Was my life truly so useless that I could be extinguished from existence for 3 days and nobody could possibly care? I wondered where I had become isolated. I turned back to periods when I could have worked harder at my career. Images of friendships I had let break apart through introversion and inertia poured across my head. Then I realized that, should my body not be numb to the point of immobility, I would have burst out in laughter. I became lonely. Naturally, I felt isolated as well. Right then, I was the most alone human being there had ever seen. Surely there were scientists just a few feet from my terrestrial body, but my mind had been detached entirely, as alone as anyone might have been. I let my imagination to stray. By now I felt as though I had spent hours in the chamber. Though I had intended to spend this time organizing some kind of artistic project, maybe the great American book, I found my mind returning often to my present situation. I considered my body and the container that housed it obsessively. The numbing drug must have been extremely remarkable. The rumble of my stomach or the least wisp of breath going through my nasal cavities eluded me. Then a pair of entwining ideas crashed into my head. A. Could I perhaps be dead? B. Of course not at all. That would be insane. I knew how I had ended myself here. I had registered to participate in an experiment designed to land me in this precise situation. I have to say, though, I felt rather dead. It felt as though I had no guarantee I still existed without my body, or the surroundings as a benchmark. My ideas started fighting one another. A. I most definitely am not dead. The experiment was meant to produce just this. B. Why not you feel anything if you are not dead? Why can't you feel anything, saliva or your breath? A. But right now I am thinking, so I know I am not dead. B. And what does that imply? A. As you know, I so am, I suppose. I am this, I suppose, as well. A wiser man might have informed you about the speaker. But the only guarantee I had that I was alive was that declaration from an unidentified source. I was still living as long as I was still thinking. I started to visualize me drifting across a void in space. Before my eyes, the picture was crisp, my arms rigid, my body laid flat as I shot past stars and other planets. I saw my body thread past planetary rings and past asteroids. The sun warmed my body, while the frigid ice of the frozen planets touched my skin. Except I felt those feelings hardly at all. I have to keep myself in mind of it. I was beginning to picture emotions absent from reality. For the length of the experiment, I was unsure about how much I should try to suppress these emotions or simply embrace them. Just another query to consider, I guess. I came to understand at one point that I had long been in sensory deprivation. I had not been counting, hence I had no idea how long. Like it had been for days already. Had it been already several days? That gave one some alarming considerations. 3 days stretched on in a timeless emptiness like an unbounded century. They had promised me that I would spend 3 days just within the machine. But just how could I be sure? I had nowhere to get out once I was within. They could have me stay as long as they pleased. Perhaps it was their all-along strategy. A. How could they have got away with that? Who knows what all those signed liability waivers said? I put down reading them after the third or fourth one. I might have agreed to this. A. You are nuts. B. I'm not sure if I'm crazy or not. I have no idea how long I have been here. Hey, therefore count. That's accurate. One way I could find out my length of stay within the machine. Tallied. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and much more. I came to 60 by counting. That was a moment. I then counted still another minute, and another, and still another, and another. I simply kept on like this. I never wavered in my attention toward the current work. I then put in 1,000 minutes. Technically, 1,000 minutes was just little more than 16 and a half hours. Surely not the 3 days I was meant to be within the machine, but that was 16 and a half hours on top of all the time I had already spent considering my life and fantasizing of flying across space. Surely I had thought for more time than I had counted. I estimated my length of stay in the machine. It felt as though it had been over 3 days. I simply kept reminding myself that I would be released from the machine not too far off. I let my imagination stray once more. My body was drifting once more across space. I saw it slide farther and farther into an unbounded black emptiness. The suns and planets vanished from view until I was really profoundly alone. A crawling sensation of cold started to set in the black abyss. Its stinging bite extended my legs and body up to my face. My naked skin grew light blue and started to crystallize like a husk. I watched the surface of my stomach split and chip as my body sank more into darkness. Chunk by slow, bits of my body started to float into the dark. Every fragment of flesh I threw away sent a fresh wave of agony coursed through me. I could not move. My arms and legs were so frigid that I could not grip onto my frozen body and try to put it back together. I tried to scream, but my tongue had swollen so big it filled my freezing, disintegrating mouth. My body burst all at once into a rainbow of sharp, bleeding ice fragments. The suffering was intolerable. Then I was, once more, alone myself in the gloom. Bodiless. I was so desperate to create, without lungs to release the terrified gasps. I had to keep reminding myself, it was not real. I am still living. Still here, someplace is my body. But gosh, did that not feel real? B. It was not actual, though. Real or not, was it painful? B. Indeed. A. You're afraid. B. Correct. A. Calm down. Would you hear that? I heard using ears a million miles distant. Not my own voice, but rather one exploded into my head. Its bristly accent was familiar. Hi, Dr. Monison here is me. I am reaching you once more using the tiny speakers found within the exoskeleton helmet. It gives me great pride to say that you 3 days within the machine have gone perfectly. My alert melted fast into relief. I tried, but not very well, to smile. We would want to let you know at this point the state of our experiment. The information coming from your brain scans is really helpful. There are several medical ramifications. Our institutional review board has been approached, and approval to prolong the experiment endlessly has been granted. Naturally, this line of action fits the responsibility waivers you signed before. The gadget should be able to prolong your life for a few more weeks until your body loses capacity to sustain it anymore. Not to panic. $5,000 will still be credited into your account. I appreciate your helping hand. Your giving will save lives. I aimed to yell. My arms no longer part of me. I tried to flail in protest and fight back against the doctor's words, but my screams were silenced. Inside me, I sensed a deep, repeating hole of anxiety. Still, I never would really feel anything again. I would pass death in this chamber. Days of work would be involved. Those days would also seem to last months. Those months would also be torture. I once more found myself drifting in an unbounded gloom. Stars or planets did not exist there. My body was all that existed, definitely only once. Arguably living, but always dead. I let myself float and stopped timing the seconds. Once more, my mind drifted, this time for considerably longer. I dreamed of a future I would never be able to lead as well as of my childhood. I felt guilty about the items I hadn't yet checked and created an imaginary bucket list. I carried on discussions in my head between lovers and old friends, and occasionally I thought very little. I occasionally vanished completely from the planet. But I felt it later on. I had something. First, I had no idea what it was. I could not tell if I was dreaming or not. It had been so long since I felt anything. My big toe was involved here. Right foot, my big toe on top. Somehow there it still possessed sensation. Not a lot of feeling, it felt like when you sit on your hand and it almost but not quite turns numb, like a collection of pins and needles massaging it. To try to figure out how this feeling had returned, I wiggled the toe about the little that I could. I felt it then, a small prick. The smallest, sloshy drip of agony against my big toe. Something keen. IV needle. It must have become dislodged some way. Perhaps one of those lab coat-wearing schmucks stumbled across something. I knew just that I could feel once more. I became immediately like I had been born once more, like I had perished and then emerged from the ashes. This needle has to have been among the ones meant to bring the numbing medication into my body. It slipped somewhere, and suddenly I felt just a tiny sensation in my toe. Unfortunately, my big toe was hardly the remnant of my body most equipped to coordinate my epic escape. Still, I was in great delight, since I carried a secret weapon with me. Time is, an old saying goes, if you give a monkey a typewriter and infinite time, he will eventually write the complete works of Shakespeare. Likewise, with a half-numb big toe and unlimited time to plan my dramatic escape. My large toe was insufficient to pry open the exoskeleton. I strained, but I couldn't reach any other cord to get them out. The IV needle that had previously been removed was all I could get, and I developed my plan using that IV needle. I moved my toe over it. Though wounded, I knew it would work. I knew I had manipulated the hands of those dumb scientists. My efforts had left my toe skin thinner. I knew then I would be all right. Their choices just amounted to two. Allow me bleed out, in which case I would at least be free from this horror, or allow me out of the chamber long enough to reattach the IV. Either way, my scheme was perfect. In either case, at least momentarily, I would be free. It took them a few minutes to see what I had done. This is Dr. Monison speaking via the small speaker in the exoskeleton helmet. You seem to have cut yourself inside the exoskeleton. We decided to stop the experiment and fix the mistake after some debate. Stand by. Soon the exoskeleton will open. Soon the light that invaded my eyes virtually blinded me. I listened to the mechanical thunks and whirs of the machine opening as the men around me spoke. Better than any touch I had ever felt, the short tug as needles and tubes were taken from me. They allowed me to let go. I was released. For hours, my body felt dead. The medication stopped me entirely from moving at all. The researchers left me in the exoskeleton for that period while they bandaged my big toe and reviewed data. Though I attempted to pay attention to all they said, I discovered I cannot focus. The strong lights above me burnt my eyes, which had become used to pristine blackness. A dull aching in my joints started as the medications gradually departed my body. A crew of lab coats pulled my body from the exoskeleton after some time. Overhead, I felt a dressing robe slip fall on. I was slung into a wheelchair. Still unable to move, I listened to the metal wheel roll as it carried that chair much more into their lab. Explain once more regarding your floating through space. Describe the sensation like, please allow me to leave. I cannot, as you are aware. We really need the information you are providing. One could say that lives are at risk. Besides, we cannot risk you visiting the police. You are returning inside the machine. In the little interrogation room put up someplace in the vast subterranean lab of the research organization, this discussion had been going for about an hour. I still found mobility somewhat difficult, even though I had recovered enough feeling to talk. It was obvious that I would be returned within the machine till my body died as soon as I outlived my value to the lab coats. The information the researchers had thus far was so valuable that they had little trouble keeping me against will. Tied to a frigid folding chair with only a thin dressing robe, I pondered my fate as I sat in that little metal room. For $5,000 I had sold all my life. That I could postpone returning in the machine for as long as I resisted Dr. Monasin's interrogation was my one break now. I knew, though, I was simply postponing the unavoidable. Now, banded, I gazed down at my big toe. I had not realized, even after leaving the machine, the scientists were unlikely to let me leave the building alive, not after they chose to confine me till I passed either. What would happen if I skipped the questions? The information we hope to get from those questions is vital and could save lives. But should we not be able to elicit it, the data obtained from the exoskeleton will be plenty. Should you refuse to respond, we will now bring you back to the machine. Thus, it made no difference. I already knew I was dead. As long as I could as well delay. Fine. What would you like me to ask about? I responded to hundreds of questions, most of which I repeated several times. It ran several hours. The scientists paid hardly attention to what I said. In the room with me was a recorder. Someone would definitely sift over my responses later, but for now the discussion seemed largely for the benefit of posterity. Still, I realized something at some time. My body has totally emptied the medicines. Though technically I could move once more, right now I was hooked to a chair. If they wanted me to go back inside the machine, though, they couldn't keep me bound. And from that insight, I developed a scheme. I knew I would just have few seconds. I knew I couldn't sprint right away. They would catch me. I would have to persuade them I accepted my fate as inevitable. I was dragging myself back into the chamber with the exoskeleton when the questioning came to end. Maybe anticipating I would leave otherwise, the scientists kept me restrained on the way. But when it came time to place me in the machine, the ties came off. They removed my nightgown and raised me into the machine. I let my body go limp as they did, mimicking the same numbness that had limited my mobility until lately. Dr. Monasin spoke to me via a loudspeaker in the ceiling while I relaxed in the rubber within the exoskeleton. I regret we have to split once more. Future study will benefit much from your responses. I realize it would seem today that we are villains. Still, the material we are gathering is priceless. There will be life saved someday. You are serving the planet very wisely. His researchers came back to plode my body with needles and tubes as his speech concluded. Though I held tight, I was ready to flee. They would have to think I couldn't move. In my right arm, I sensed pinpoints. The numbing substance was already filling me to overflowing. My stay was going to be brief. I catapulted myself upward to be standing inside the machine as several of the lab coats came up on my left side to put another IV. Startled by my rapid movement, the scientists on my left withdrew. As the IVs and tubes tightened against the force of my unexpected movement, I felt a stinging ache in my right arm. Panic broke out throughout the room. Men rushed in all directions from me. As though on its own volition, I sensed my body moving. Reaching toward my right, my left arm tore a sequence of cords and needles from my flesh. Blood sprayed across the machine. My right arm dropped to my side very casually. Naked like the day I was born, I drove myself out of the machine and onto the floor. Though most of my body was good, the numbing agent had turned off my right arm. Through the door, I had entered the lab. I ran, what now seemed like a lifetime ago. I refused to turn around to check whether I was under pursuit. My only action was sprinting. I pulled the door open and saw a lengthy hallway leading to a set of alternating staircases. Staircases I had walked up and down multiple times getting ready for the experiment. Stairs I had always imagined I would one day walk up for the final time. I pushed myself as hard as I could. I sprinted until I came to the steps with my right arm limp hanging beside me. Men's furious cries behind me stayed constant in thud of their footsteps. It was game over, I knew, should they find me. I basically jumped the whole first flight when I got to the stairs. Just 2 men had maintained pace with me as I turned to ascend the next flight. I started to feel hope suddenly. Maybe I could outrun every other one. I would then visit the police to have the opportunity to underline this whole operation under a microscope. I would be free as soon as I reached the top of that second flight of steps and passed the exit doors. As soon as I climbed the stairs, my dreams were crushed. 15 men at least watched over the egress of the structure. Clearly, my escape had been a contingency for which the facility had ready plans. I knew just one way I could go as the men came behind and in front of me. Past the first story, the staircases alternated, from the top all the way down. I continued running. After one staircase, another staircase. My tired body objected to every stride. As I ascended those steps, my dead arm swung against walls and stair rails, the screams of enraged males filling my ears as I moved step after step. I was on the last stair soon. Rising from the ceiling, a ladder guided to a hatch on the building's top. The only thing this was, I was about to once more view the outer world. Once I arrived there, I knew I was free, but not sure where I was going to go. About 6 feet into the air, I leaped onto the ladder and hauled myself upward, pushed on the hatch when I got to the top. It was weighty and hardly moved. I strained against the hatch momentarily, then felt a strong hold on my ankle. One among the men had caught up. He was starting to pull me off the ladder, his frigid hand encircling my leg. I turned slightly to find it Dr. Monison. His eyes were crimson and saucers in size. It was as though one were gazing into the eyes of the devil himself. I responded strictly out of impulse. My free foot swung toward the doctor's face as my hold on the ladder tightened. I started to smile at the sensation as my heel struck his mouth, teeth and blood spraying in all directions. Though it hurt like you would not believe, it felt damned nice to feel something. Dr. Monison let his hold slack. Once more, I pushed higher, and the hatch opened. I staggered up onto the building's flat roof. The rooftop was blanketed in a thin layer of gravel. Though I kept moving, the jagged stones stabbed at my bare feet. Hurrying to the brink of the roof, I peered out into the city. My vista extended a lovely horizon of skyscrapers and stars. I could feel the chilly breeze against my naked flesh. As I ascended the rooftop brink, the voices of the men behind me hardly registered. I had to be a sight to the folks strolling on the pavement below. A naked man looking at the horizon from the brink of a skyscraper as though he has never seen one before. Kindly come down from there. You are not required to reverse through the machine. We only need you to drop over here. Once more, it was Dr. Monison. Now that he was short a few teeth, his voice was difficult to understand. I looked at him instead of the horizon. Other guys in lab coats surrounded him on all sides. I realized at that point that my actual options were few. Could I trust Dr. Monison to not place me back in the machine? Not likely, but right now I had no chance to flee. Too many of them for me to flee. I stepped back as one of the researchers stretched out to seize me. I felt myself chuckling as my body dropped to the ground below. It was just like I experienced in the machine. Once my body was floating. The cold air chilled my body, and once more, I felt nothing. I heard church bells ringing just before I started to walk. Luluja. I realized I had to be headed toward heaven. There was no heaven arriving. Rather, I discovered I was totally dark, feeling nothing, seeing nothing, just thinking back on my past acts. Is this our definition of death? To respond to my inquiry, I heard a familiar voice. Hi there, Dr. Monison, here is it. Once more, I am speaking to you from a small speaker housed within the exoskeleton helmet. Your 3 days within the exoskeleton have been well spent. I would have wept had I not still been numbingly drunk. We are opening the machine right now. We shall then do a physical assessment at that point. You clearly are eager to go. I can promise you we will move swiftly to bring about that. I much appreciate your help with this project. It has been priceless. The 3 days. I had been in that machine exactly 3 days. It didn't click until they were dragging me off the machine. My big toe lacked a bandage and no needle close enough for me to have cut myself on. In the hours following the experiment's end, the facility was only friendly. They gave me a nice area to relax while the rest of the medications departed my body. When I declined to talk, they were not nasty, even though they questioned my background. The researchers delighted to respond to my inquiries on the experience, happy to inform me it was just in my brain. Dr. Monison made sure I had whatever mental health tools I asked for in the days following the trial. He linked me with the therapist I had been seeing for several weeks. I take twice daily the antidepressant that the therapist prescribed. I am back into my regular life. I pay my rent. Someone fresh is here with me. I started working at still another book publisher. Like every dream I have had come true. But I can't get the machine out of my thoughts, no matter how long I chat to the therapist or how many medicines I take. I find myself wondering endlessly about how those 3 days seem to stretch out indefinitely. A. But you left the machine empty. Your 3 days have run out. B. Yes, but A. However, what? B. I once left the machine empty-handed. A. Still, that was not real. B. However, it felt real. A. Does this have actual feel? B. Now, I'm not sure. Could 3 days feel like this? Even longer? Could I visualize a job, a therapist, a better life? Not clear. I sometimes close my eyes and find myself too terrified to open them since I fear I will see just blackness when I do. I worry I would still be floating, immobile, among those imagined stars.